Everything else can wait. I'm here." Her throat moved. She folded the paper along its original creases and put it in the pocket of her cardigan and squared her shoulders. "I'm going with my father," she said to Brock. "I'll be in touch through Ingrid." Brock's voice cracked open on her name, Phoebe, and what came through the crack was something that might have been genuine, the sound of a man who has broken something and is only now beginning to understand what it weighed. "I do," she said, 2 words, 2 years behind them. She turned toward the door. I walked beside her. Saul stepped back to let us pass. Ingrid fell in quietly behind us. At the entryway, Phoebe took her coat from the hook on the wall, the coat she had hung there when she arrived at her own home, and she put it on herself, each button from the bottom up, unhurried and complete. I heard Ridley say something behind us. I did not turn around. I heard Brock say her name once more, softer this time, less certain of its own weight. Phoebe opened the front door. The cold came in again, that same honest November cold, and she walked out into it without hesitating. I followed her. Behind us the door swung shut on the warm light and the good china, and the centerpiece of imported gourds and everything that had been assembled in that house to look like something it was not. The 9 Suburbans were still in the driveway. The people beside them straightened slightly as we came out. The simple acknowledgement of people who have been waiting and understand that the waiting is over. Ingrid came to stand beside us on the front step. "I'll have an emergency protective order drafted and filed before 10 o'clock tonight," she said quietly. "He will be required to vacate the residence within 24 hours. The house is jointly titled. He goes. You stay." Phoebe listened carefully. She nodded. "Thank you," she said. Ingrid touched her arm briefly and stepped away to make a call. I looked at my daughter standing in front of 9 black vehicles on a Thursday night in November in Brentwood, Tennessee. Her coat buttoned to the throat, her breath making small clouds in the cold air, her face looking like her own for the first time all evening, looking like herself in a way that takes time to look like again after you've spent years looking like someone else's idea of you. "Ready," I said. "Yes," she said. We walked to the F-150. The cab smelled like motor oil, and the faint chemical smell of the degreaser I'd used on the engine last week, and an old pine air freshener I'd had on the mirror so long I couldn't tell anymore whether it actually smelled like pine or whether I simply believed it did. When Phoebe got in and pulled the door shut, she sat for a moment, hands in her lap, eyes straight ahead, and breathed. I thought she was going to cry. She did not cry. She let out a long, slow breath, the last of whatever she had been using to hold herself together all evening. Then she looked at the dashboard. "Dad," she said, "this truck is really old." I started the engine, first turn the way it always does. "It runs fine," I said. "Heater takes a minute." She pulled her coat tighter and looked out the window as I backed out of the circular drive. The 9 Suburbans were still there, their dark shapes catching the light from the ornamental pear trees. And then we cleared the bend in the road, and the house was gone. I did not look back. I had seen enough of it. We drove without talking for a while. The heater found its way to warm gradually, which has always seemed to me like an honest way to operate, working up to something rather than pretending you're already there. Some things should not claim to be warm before they are. Phoebe broke the silence first. "How long did you know?" she asked, not accusatory, genuinely wanting the answer. "Know what specifically?" I said. "That something was wrong." I thought about that carefully. She deserved a real answer, not a reassuring one, because she had spent years in a house where the reassuring answers were given instead of the real ones, and she deserved the other kind now, even when the other kind is harder to receive. "The first time you texted me instead of calling," I said, "about 14 months ago, you said your phone was charging. I believed you then. I stopped believing it around the 3rd time." She was quiet for a moment. "I didn't think you noticed things like that." "I notice most things," I said. "I just don't always say so right away." She turned to look at me in the dark of the cab. "I kept thinking I could fix it," she said, "that if I was more patient, more understanding, more whatever he needed, things would get better. That the version of us he put on social media was real, and I just wasn't trying hard enough to actually live there." "I know," I said. "I gave up my studio, Dad. 3 years of building that thing. Clients who trusted me." "I know, honey. I had an office on Demonbrun Street with a south-facing window. Good light all afternoon." She paused on that detail, the window, the light, the specific texture of a surrendered thing that you cannot recover in the same exact form. "I gave up that lease because he said having my own separate space sent the wrong message about our commitment." "I thought I was choosing," she said. "I believed it was my choice." I drove for a moment without speaking, the headlights picking out the state road ahead of us, the dark Tennessee tree line on both sides. "Your mother used to say," I said, that the most dangerous thing a person can do to you is make you believe their idea was yours. Phoebe turned toward the window. She said it about a painter we hired once, who talked me into a color for the living room I didn't actually want, I said, but she meant it generally. She meant all the ways a person can walk you away from yourself, so slowly you don't notice the distance until you stop and look back and can't see where you started. A small sound came from the passenger seat, brief and surprised. It took me a moment to place it. It was a laugh. A painter, she said. What color? Sage green. For the living room in a house with west-facing windows. I told your mother the man was the professional and knew what he was doing. What did she say? She said I was being an idiot, and the paint was going to look like a waiting room. She was completely correct. Is it still there? I repainted it the month after she passed, I said. Benjamin Moore white, 2 coats and a Saturday afternoon. I have never regretted anything less in my life. Phoebe laughed. Longer this time, the genuine kind that arrives before you have decided to let it. The kind more honest than the kind you choose. And it was the laugh I remembered from when she was 17, and on the phone with her friends, and I could hear it from the kitchen. The laugh her mother used to narrate from another room, as though it were its own creature living in the house that belonged to all of us. It filled the old truck cab and pressed up against the windows, and I kept my eyes on the road and did not say anything, because there was nothing to say that would improve on the sound of it. Her phone buzzed. She read the message. "Epo granted," she said. "He has until 8 tomorrow morning to vacate." "Good," I said. She set the phone on the dash and looked out at the sky. Clouds thinning, a scatter of stars coming through, a half-moon sitting low over the Cedar Ridge. "Dad." "Yeah." "Those people tonight," she paused. "You really helped all of them. All 9. "Over time," I said. "Nothing dramatic at the time it was happening. You show up when someone needs you to show up. You sign what needs to be signed when signing it is the right thing. You answer the phone at inconvenient hours. You write the check when writing it is right. It accumulates. You don't notice it accumulating. And then one November night you make one phone call and 9 people get in their cars and drive." She thought about that for a long moment, her head resting against the seat. "I want that," she said finally. "I want to be someone who builds that kind of thing. Relationships that show up. People who come when you call because of who you are, not what you have." "You will," I said. "You already started. You just couldn't see it from inside that house." She closed her eyes. The tension I had been watching in her shoulders and her jaw and her hands all evening released gradually, the way a fist opens when there is finally nothing left that requires holding. The first lights of Cookville were beginning to appear through the windshield. The water tower catching the moonlight, the white steeple of the Baptist church over the tree line, the warm scattered lights of Route 70, telling me we were almost home. "Dad," she said, eyes still closed, "you have 9 car worth of friends and you drive this truck." "The F-150 runs," I said. "It really is ugly, though." "It is," I agreed, completely. She smiled without opening her eyes. She was still smiling when I turned onto Birchfield Road, and the porch light was on the way it always is when I go out at night, because a house should look like it expects you back. This one did, and we were. What followed in the months after was not dramatic in the way that Thursday night was dramatic. It was the quieter, more grinding work of institutions doing what they are built to do when given sufficient evidence and sufficient reason. Ingrid filed the emergency protective order that night and had it signed before 10. Brock vacated the Brentwood house the following morning. He did not contest it. Men who exercise control through subtlety rarely have the appetite for open confrontation once the subtlety has been stripped away. By February, the civil suits had begun arriving. 7 subcontractors across 3 Hartwell projects collectively owed $580,000 in unpaid work, each one a small business owner who had worked in good faith and stopped waiting for a payment that was never coming. Ridley's name appeared as personal guarantor on 2 of the contracts, which meant his exposure was no longer abstract or theoretical. In March, the federal referral came through. Judah's financial analysis was submitted to the Nashville field office, citing potential violations of 18 U.S.C. Quav 1343 in connection with the false statements submitted to Keystone Commercial Lending. Federal involvement complicated things considerably for Brock, because state charges can sometimes be managed through attorneys with the right local relationships. Federal charges have a different ceiling. His attorneys knew it. The negotiation took several months. In June, Hartwell Property Solutions filed Chapter 7 bankruptcy, liquidation, not reorganization, which means there was nothing left to reorganize. I read about it on a Thursday morning at my kitchen table over coffee, and I felt the thing I feel when a predictable outcome finally arrives. Not satisfaction, not pleasure, but the specific tired relief of a leak that has been dripping for a long time finally stopping. In August, Brock entered a plea agreement with the U.S. Attorney's Office. One count of wire fraud, reduced from a broader original exposure that Judith described to me on a Tuesday phone call as considerably more serious. He received 2.5 years with supervised release to follow. Ridley entered a separate agreement on the cosigner fraud, a substantial fine and 18 months of probation, lighter than what he deserved, heavier than what he had believed was possible as recently as February. In October, the divorce was finalized. Phoebe received the marital residence and her grandmother's savings account restored in full with interest. Ingrid described the settlement on the phone as appropriate given the circumstances, which in legal language means the other party did not fare well. Phoebe did not seem particularly interested in the settlement. She had already signed a design contract with the same hospitality group she had pitched 4 years earlier, 2 hotel properties in Nashville, a third under discussion in Memphis. She called me the afternoon she signed. "Dad," she said, "I have big south-facing windows again." I was in the garage. I set down what I was holding and sat on the old workbench stool and held the phone, and I listened to my daughter tell me about her windows. I thought about her mother. I thought about 25 years of work and one Thursday night, and the arithmetic of what gets lost and what gets found. "Good," I said. "That's good, Phoebe." That evening she came for dinner. She brought groceries and stood at my kitchen counter, cooking with the ease of someone who knows where everything lives. And I sat at the table and watched her, and this house had the sound that a house has when there are 2 people in it instead of one, heavier and warmer at the same time, both of those things together. December came back around the way it does, without asking permission, settling into Tennessee like a coat that fits because it has been worn so many times. I was in the garage on a Saturday afternoon, finally getting to the timing belt I had been deferring since October, when I heard Phoebe's car in the driveway. She had bought herself a used Forester in the spring. Practical, reliable, the choice of a woman who has decided her decisions will reflect what she actually needs, rather than what looks appropriate parked in a particular driveway. She appeared in the garage doorway the way she used to appear in doorways when she was young, filling the frame not because of her size, but because of the quality of attention she brought with her, the way some people make a room aware of itself simply by walking in. She was wearing her work coat, the good gray one she'd bought when she started the hotel project, and she had her design bag over one shoulder, and she looked like herself, specifically, deliberately like herself. "You're still working on the truck," she said. "Timing belt," I said. "It's overdue." It's always something with that truck. If it wasn't something, I wouldn't have anything to do out here. She came in and set her bag on the corner of the workbench and looked around the garage with the particular attention of a designer who cannot stop evaluating a space, even when she's not on the clock. "How's the Nashville project?" I said. "We finished the West Wing this week," she said. "The light in those rooms in the afternoon is exactly what I wanted. I had to fight the general contractor for the window placement." "Was he right?" She looked at me. "No," she said, "I was right. He thought I was being difficult." "Were you?" "I was being correct," she said, which sometimes looks the same from the outside. She leaned against the workbench with her arms crossed, the posture of someone settling in for a real conversation. "I have a question." "You can always ask me something." She was quiet for a moment, looking at the old truck, at the organized rows of tools, at the space that had been more home to me than most rooms in actual houses. "Do you regret it?" she said. "Not coming sooner, not saying something the first time you noticed." I thought about that carefully, the way it deserved to be thought about. "Every day," I said, "and also no." She looked at me. "Every day, because you were hurting, and I saw pieces of it, and I told myself you were grown, and it wasn't mine to manage. Also no, because if I had stepped in the first time I noticed, you would have defended him. You would have explained the marriage to me, told me things were fine, because you were still inside it, and you couldn't see the full shape of it from where you were standing. Some doors have to be opened from the inside. I couldn't open it for you. I could only make sure I was standing there when you were ready to open it yourself." Phoebe was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the December light through the garage window was the low gold of late afternoon, thin and angled, the kind that makes everything look like it was placed on purpose. "Mom would have liked tonight," she said, "not a question. She would have cooked something complicated," I said, "and acted like it was nothing. And made you do the dishes." "Every single time," I said. She smiled. She pushed off from the workbench and walked to the F-150 and put her hand flat on the hood, the way you put a hand on something that has been steadfast, not out of affection but acknowledgement. This truck is still ugly, she said. It started this morning. That's a pretty low bar, Dad. Low and reliable is underrated, I said. She laughed, and it went up into the garage rafters and came back down, and I let it fill the space for a moment before I said anything else. Are you staying for dinner? I brought groceries, she said, picking up her bag. I found Mom's recipe, the chicken and dumplings. I set the wrench on the workbench. I turned off the work lamp and stood for a moment in the remaining light. The old tools, the old truck, the garage that has been more mine than any office I ever occupied. And I thought about 25 years of work and one Thursday night, and all the distance between the man who ran a company and the man standing here in Cookville with grease on his hands and his daughter waiting in the kitchen. The distance was not what I expected. Shorter in some ways, longer in others. Mostly it was just the distance you travel when you show up when it matters, do the work in front of you, and let the rest find its own level. I followed Phoebe into the house. The kitchen light was on, warm and ordinary. She was already at the counter, setting things out in her organized way, moving through my kitchen like she had never stopped belonging in it. Her mother's recipe card was propped against the backsplash, blue ink, a little faded, the handwriting I had not seen in 8 years and still recognized before anything else in her room. Through the window, the first snow of December was falling, small and unhurried, taking its time with no particular place to be. I washed my hands at the sink. What can I do? I said. Phoebe handed me a cutting board and a knife without looking up. Onion, she said, and don't complain about your eyes. I'm 64 years old, I said. I can handle an onion. You said that last Thanksgiving, she said. There were tears. Those were from the onions. That's what crying from onions is, she said, and she laughed and I laughed, and outside the snow kept falling, soft and quiet through the December dark, and inside the kitchen smelled like something was already in the process of becoming good. That was enough. That was more than enough. There is a moment in every family's story when you understand that what you were fighting for was never the outcome. It was always the person. I am 64 years old. I drive an old truck and fix things in my garage and let the world decide what I am worth by the age of my boots. I do not regret any of it. But I will carry, for whatever years I have left, the months I spent watching my daughter disappear and telling myself it was not mine to address. Don't be like me in that regard. Don't wait for the moment to feel right before you step between the person you love and the thing that is diminishing them. The moment is never right. You step anyway. I believe that the people we are given are not given so we can observe them from a careful distance. They are given so we can show up, imperfectly, incompletely, in old trucks on cold nights with nothing to offer but presence. That has always been enough. If any part of this reached you tonight, I am grateful. Leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if Daddy's Revenge Stories has ever given you something worth keeping, subscribe so the next one finds you. Thank you for staying until the end. It means more than you know.